Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are heading into a place that feels both strangely familiar and deeply alien.
We're talking about Switchcreek, Tennessee.
Exactly. Population 815, a small town completely cut off from the rest of the world for, what, 13 years now?
13 years following an event they just call the changes. And it's not just isolated, it's become a living experiment.
Oh, right. A biological and sociological pressure cooker. It's now home to 3 distinct human subspecies, or clades.
And our source material gives us this incredibly vivid, often brutal look at how this community is fighting to survive. It's a story defined by, new biology, but also some very old corruption.
And our entry point into all of this is a man named Pax Martin.
Pax is what they call a skip.
Meaning he's unchanged, he's one of the few who remain genetically human, and he actually ran away when the changes first hit.
But now he's back, and he's back for the funeral of his childhood friend, Joe Lynn.
So let's set the stage a little more. The changes weren't just a disease. They permanently rewrote human DNA.
A condition the scientists eventually called Transcription Divergence Syndrome, or TDS.
And to really get what Switchcreek is now, you have to remember the chaos it was born from.
Oh, absolutely. The source material is clear on this. First, you had masked reporters invading the town, treating it like a freak show.
Then the government quarantine, which led to the Lambert riots, people trying to break out.
And in the middle of all that chaos, the unsolved murder of the 2 Argo brothers, the Stone Ciphers. That violence, that initial trauma, it really set the stage for who holds power today.
It's the foundation for everything. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this in, I think, 3 layers.
First, the biology of the clades themselves. TDS A, B, and C. How their bodies literally dictate their place in society.
Second, the town's bizarre and toxic economy, which is built around a substance they call the vintage.
And finally, the mystery at the heart of it all. Joe Lynn's death. It was ruled a suicide, but her friends, they are absolutely convinced it was murder.
Okay, so let's start with that new reality. When Pax gets back to Switchcreek, he's immediately hit by these incredible biological differences. Not subtle at all.
No, it's radical. Let's start with the Argos. They're TDSA.
And what does that mean physically?
They are terrifyingly impressive. They're extremely tall, sometimes a full foot taller than Pax.
Yes, again, Toad.
Incredibly pale. The sources say it ranges from the color of pencil lead to, like, talcum powder white. They're described as horse-faced, skinny, almost like walking ladders.
But that's deceptive, right? Because they're immensely strong.
That's the key detail. You see this bony frame, but it hides this incredible power. They're compared to scythes or siege engines.
Wow.
And Deke, who is Pax's oldest friend, he's the best example of this. The text describes his hand as being the size of a skillet.
And feeling like a cinder block.
Rough and unyielding, yeah. For Argos, violence is this constant internal threat they have to manage. Deke even admits it himself, that his rage is something he has to actively, consciously restrain.
So that's their immediate struggle. But their long-term crisis it's existential, isn't it?
It's fertility, or rather, the lack of it.
They're this physically dominant species that can't reproduce.
It's heartbreaking, really. The source calls their monthly attempts solitaire. Argo apples, like Deke and his wife Donna, they volunteer for these incredibly complex and almost always failed IVF studies.
And their genetic material just gets shipped off to labs.
Exactly. Forced intimacy in a petri dish in some foreign city. And it almost never works. Fertilization rarely takes hold.
And Donna herself is a powerful example of the changes. She was a poor black woman before and now.
Now she's whiter than Pax was. It's just a complete genetic rewrite. And this whole clade, this entire species, is driven by this desperate need to not let the humans win.
Meaning they just have to survive, to continue their line, no matter how painful it is.
And that desperation informs everything, their politics, their loyalties. It's why Deke has the position he does.
Explain that a bit. How did Deke become the unofficial chief?
Well, after the chaos of the Stone Cipher murders, the 2 Argos who were killed, the town realized something.
They needed the Argos' strength.
They needed it for protection, but it had to be controlled. Deke was the answer. He took that potential for violence and channeled it into a structured civic duty. He runs the volunteer fire department. He's the muscle that keeps the town safe.
Okay, so from the powerful but reproductively challenged Argos, let's move to the betas, TDSB. This is Joe Lynn's clade.
And the betas introduce a whole new biological paradigm.
Asexual reproduction.
Parthenogenesis. The betas are hairless, and they have these beautiful, intense skin tones. The source says Cabernet, raspberry, rose. But the defining trait is they don't need men to have children.
And all their children are girls.
Bald girls, yes. For years, scientists were baffled. They finally figured out that the fetuses they simply arrived, like new symptoms. No sexual contact required.
That has to completely upend traditional social structures.
It absolutely does. Look at Tommy Shields, Jo Lynn's partner. He's called her husband, but the source is very clear. It's an arrangement that's strictly for the kids.
He's a social father, not a biological one.
Exactly. The beta men are, from a reproductive standpoint, biologically redundant. And that creates this intense focus for them on their parental roles, a kind of possessiveness, which we see with Tommy later.
And finally, we have the Charlies. TDSC, this is where we find the political power.
Yeah, people like Mayor Rhonda and Pax's own father, Harlan Martin.
And physically, they're the opposite of the Argos.
Completely. They're described as squat, moon-faced, and wide. So wide they engulf their metal folding chairs.
And the older men carry a lot of weight.
A substantial amount of fat. But what seems unhealthy is actually, well, it's the evolutionary adaptation that powers the entire town's economy. And that leads us directly to the vintage.
Before we get there, let's just land on Pax for a second. He's the outsider here, the skip.
And his entire perspective is filtered through guilt.
Deep, profound guilt.
He ran. When the changes hit, he abandoned his pregnant friend, Jo Lynn. And he sees that as the ultimate act of cowardice, especially when he compares himself to Deke, who stayed and became the town's anchor.
He tried to erase his past, didn't he?
Completely. He talks about working in Chicago restaurants where his past was just fog, too indistinct for anyone to ask about. So his return isn't just about a funeral. It's about confronting the person he was and the life he fled from.
So you have these three new species, but the towns still have a political structure. And it's run entirely by the changed.
Which creates this really compelling power dynamic. You've got Rhonda, the Charlie, as the mayor. She holds the political power.
Deke, the Argo, holds the physical protective power.
The chief.
And Reverend Hook, the Beta, holds the spiritual and, critically, the reproductive authority.
So you have this triangle of power.
A necessary but deeply contentious triangle. They need each other to keep the town from falling apart, but their biological goals are so fundamentally different that there's constant friction under the surface. And that friction is about to explode, especially when we look at the Charlie economy.
Right, and that economy, it's all built on the vintage. This is the town's most valuable and its most dangerous resource.
And it comes from the older Charlie men, like Pax's father, Harlan.
It's an oily, psychoactive liquid that they secrete, but it's not just some byproduct. It's something they have to get rid of.
That's the critical part, isn't it? It's toxic to them.
Extremely. If Harlan isn't siphoned regularly, the fluid builds up and he becomes delirious, psychotic. He's at risk of, and I'm quoting here, overdosing on his own fluid.
God, that's horrific. And Harlan himself sees it as this total degradation.
He hates it. He says he's being milked like a cow. It's painful, it's dehumanizing, and it's the price the Charlies have to pay for the power this substance gives their clade.
And the extraction itself sounds awful. It's done by these younger Charlie men, the Chub Boys.
Guys like Cleet and Travis, they come in with gloves and needles and carry the stuff away in coolers. And this liquid, once it's out, it is incredibly potent.
Especially to a skip. To someone like Pax.
We get a first-hand account of just how potent it is. Pax has an accidental exposure just from grabbing his father's hand where the sores are.
And the reaction is instantaneous.
And violently psychoactive. He describes feeling halfway out of his skin and into Tommy's.
A forced empathy.
A tidal wave of it. He's flooded with all these raw emotions, empathy, disgust, jealousy all at once. It's a complete loss of self.
And it leads to this dizzying crash where he ends up at Dr. Freilich's clinic for 3 days.
3 days of ranting, preaching, and vomiting. It's an absolutely brutal experience.
And it creates an addiction.
A crippling one. Dr. Freilich compares him to a kid with an alcoholic gene taking his first drink. The vintage creates this deep psychological dependence. Pax starts to feel its absence as a physical loss.
He describes the craving as a coyote skulking just outside the firelight.
Or like something dying inside him when he's away from it.
Yeah.
Deke later tells him straight up, it's purely chemical. It's not him anymore. It's the substance in control.
So this incredibly dangerous, addictive substance is the engine of Switchcreek's economy. And it's all controlled by one person.
Mayor Rhonda. She's centralized the whole operation at the home.
Which is an extended care facility they built specifically for the wide bodies of the older Charlies.
And her public story is that she's doing it for the town's own good. She insists she has to control the supply, releasing it in dribs and drabs to prevent abuse.
But that's a complete lie, isn't it?
It's a total fabrication. She tells Pax it's just a sex thing for the Chub boys, or she compares it to NyQuil. She's actively trying to downplay its danger to him.
When, in reality,
The reality is far more corrupt. Cleet, one of the Chub boys, lets it slip. He gloats that Harlan's vintage specifically is unique. It's addictive as all hell to skips and outsiders.
so that's the real market.
That's their real target. They aren't just selling a drug, they're cultivating a weapon, the ability to chemically control people from the outside world.
And we find out she's funding this entire enterprise through theft.
Massive theft. The sources are explicit. She's skimming federal grant money TEMA, which is disaster relief, school funds, medical grants. She's stealing the money meant to help her people recover and using it to build her own power base.
So how does she keep the younger generation, the Chub boys, loyal to her operation?
She pays them with the vintage itself.
Of course.
Queet, Travis, Doreen, they get the substance as a bonus for siphoning the old men. She controls the supply, which means she controls their addiction, which means she controls their loyalty. It's a perfect, vicious cycle.
So the disaster didn't change human greed, it just gave it a new biological fuel.
Exactly. Rhonda even argues that she has to control it, otherwise desperate people will do stupid things. But she's the one creating and leveraging that desperation.
And this whole system of corruption and biological control brings us right back to Jolene. Her life and her death really throw the internal conflicts of the beta clade into sharp relief.
Yeah, the beta world is just as fraught, but in a totally different way. Jolene was living in a place called the Co-op.
A community focused on beta reproduction.
But she became an outcast there, a heretic almost. She was advocating for planned motherhood, for birth control.
Which would have been seen as a radical idea.
It was completely against the orthodoxy of the younger beta women. This created a huge ideological rift, and she was either kicked out or she chose to leave because of it.
And this opposition was led by a specific group, right? The White Scarf Girls.
They are a genuinely chilling part of this story. These are young, prepubescent beta girls who went through the changes.
And they see themselves as, what, pure?
Closer to natural born, they look at older beta women like Jolene, women who had sex with men before the changes, and they see them as tainted.
And Jolene's own daughters, Rainey and Sandra.
They are the first of the natural borns, the second-generation betas. The White Scarf Girls practically worship them. It's a terrifying purity culture where your biological history determines your moral worth.
And they were militant about it.
Absolutely. They burned an effigy of Joe's doctor, Marla Freilich, for performing abortions. The threat was very real.
Meanwhile, you have the beta men, like Tommy Shields, who are trying to find their place in this new world.
Tommy is just. He's a bundle of possessiveness. His role as husband is entirely social. He can't be the biological father.
So he doubles down on being the protector.
Exactly. He's fiercely protective of his parental role for the kids. So when Pax shows up, the guy who abandoned Jolene all those years ago, Tommy immediately sees him as a threat trying to reclaim some old territory.
But the real key to understanding Jolene's struggle, her internal life, is her online persona.
Brother Bule.
Right. Pax finds out about this from a journalist, Andrew Wagand, who runs a website called theopenswitch.com.
And what he finds is that Jolene wasn't just, venting about town politics online. She was a serious thinker. She was reading physics journals and developing these incredible theories.
She was trying to explain the changes using quantum computation and quantum evolution.
Yeah, her core theory was that the TDS clades weren't just mutations of humans.
There was something else entirely.
She saw them as analogous to parallel evolution, essentially visitors from another world who had arrived via some kind of quantum event.
Which is a huge leap, but it allowed her to explain the beta's behavior.
Precisely. She argued that parthenogenesis turns the betas into, in her words, baby-making machines, and this leads to a psychological state she called monomania.
Okay, let's unpack that. Monomania. What does that mean here?
In Jer's theory, it's the absolute overriding biological imperative of the beta species. Because their survival depends entirely on asexual reproduction, the species need to continue completely overrides any individual choice.
So for them, things like abortion or birth control aren't moral issues.
They're existential threats, a biological necessity for survival. This is why the opposition is so fierce. It's not a belief, it's an instinct.
And she saw the White Scarf Girls as the logical endpoint of that instinct.
The militant conclusion of beta biology, yes.
And she even predicted it would lead to violence.
Chillingly, yes. She wrote that these militants, in their quest to maintain the purity of the race, would eventually kill deviants.
And her quote was,
Watch CNN for the first stoning in Switchcreek. She knew exactly how dangerous this purity culture was for someone like her, someone who advocated for choice.
so when she is found hanging from an oak tree, the official ruling is suicide.
And it's based on the flimsiest evidence imaginable.
The DA, a guy named Downer, who everyone agrees is incompetent.
Right. He bases the entire ruling on the fact that Jo was prescribed antidepressants 2 years ago after she had a hysterectomy.
But the police investigation was a complete failure.
A total failure. They missed crucial details. For instance, both Rhonda and Reverend Hook knew that Jo had an abortion just a month before that hysterectomy. That context should have changed everything, but it was ignored.
And her closest friends, Deke and Donna, they just flat out reject the suicide ruling.
They find it unthinkable. They know Jolyn would never, ever abandon her daughters. And Deke points out the most obvious thing. The police never even checked her laptop for a suicide note.
Which is what sends Pax on his own investigation.
Exactly. They're all convinced someone who hated her, maybe an outsider, was responsible. So just as Pax is starting to pull at these threads of internal corruption and the mystery of Jo's death, the outside world comes crashing back in.
In a big way, the whole situation escalates with a sudden, devastating recurrence of TDSA.
The Argos strain, it hits Babahoyo, Ecuador, and it's catastrophic.
Thousands dead.
The estimates climb past 6,500 people fast. And this just reinforces how vulnerable Switchcreek is. The panic is immediate.
And the U.S. government's reaction is just as swift.
Renewed fears of quarantine immediately become a reality. Roadblocks go up. Soldiers surround the town. They are locked in again.
And once again, Mayor Rhonda proves to be a master of exploiting a crisis.
Oh, she's brilliant at it. On one hand, she starts a Helping Hands charity for Ecuador, looking like a humanitarian.
But on the other hand,
she uses the disaster to whip up nationalist and religious fervor. She pushes this narrative. They aren't us. We are Americans. We are Christians.
So she uses an external threat to create internal solidarity, all under her control.
Exactly. She isolates them politically at the very moment the government is isolating them physically.
At the same time, the town's leadership is desperate for a new explanation for the changes. The old theories about viruses or toxins have gone nowhere for a decade.
And this is where Dr. Freilich, Jo's doctor, steps in with this radical new theory. She presents it to Deke, Hook, and Rhonda.
The quantum transmission theory.
Right. This is a massive shift. Freilich is suggesting that the genetic instructions didn't evolve on Earth at all.
That they came from somewhere else.
Potentially from a parallel universe. That the instructions could transmit themselves between universes when cells are isolated from, as she puts it, measuring events.
Okay, that sounds wildly improbable. How does she even make that argument?
She uses the logic of large numbers. The probability of any single quantum event is tiny, yes. But if you accept the theory of trillions of other universes, the outcome becomes, in her words, practically inevitable.
It's bound to happen eventually.
Exactly. She compares it to monkeys migrating between continents on a floating tree. One tree making it is unlikely. But over millions of years, it's guaranteed to happen multiple times.
So the clades aren't just mutated humans. They're effectively alien races from a different evolutionary path.
And that changes everything. It's a direct confirmation of Jolynn's brother Belay theories.
And Rhonda immediately grasps the political implications.
Instantly, she says, we're not disease victims anymore. We're a race, 3 races, and from another universe.
Which gives the government the perfect excuse to lock them up forever.
The perfect public rationale. They're not just a health risk anymore. They're a geopolitical threat, a potential contamination from another reality.
And the fear that the government might just try to make us disappear forces them to activate their most desperate plan.
Genocide insurance.
It's a chilling name.
And a chilling plan. It was a secret agreement between Rhonda, Deke, and Hook, made long before the Ecuador outbreak.
What was it?
A preemptive exodus. A plan to smuggle small, genetically viable groups of all 3 clades out of Switchcreek.
Through the mountains.
Through remote mountain paths to a secret rendezvous point. Argo couples trying to have children, beta families, Charlies. The entire goal was to ensure that if the government decided on extermination, the species themselves would survive, scattered outside the quarantine zone.
The sheer pragmatism of that it's stunning.
It shows that for all the corruption and infighting, when faced with an existential threat, the 3 leaders were united by that one single goal: survival of the species. So this intense external pressure from the quarantine, it just forces all the internal corruption and secrets to the surface. Everything starts to break.
And Rhonda makes her final move on Deke. She needs him on her side.
She needs his influence, his control over the Argos, so she lays it all out for him. She admits to the skimming, the TEMA grants, the school funds, all of it.
And then she tries to buy his loyalty.
With a check for over $83,000 made out to his furniture company.
So wait, Deke knew she was corrupt. He knew she was stealing from the town.
This is Deke's great moral failure. He admits it. He knew Jolynn had the proof grant forms, bank statements. It's why he was so desperate to find her laptop.
But he did nothing.
He worked with Rhonda. He kept her secret because he genuinely believed her illegal actions were, as he puts it, necessary to guard the future of the clades.
For him, the survival of the Argos was more important than morality.
It trumped everything.
At the same time, Pax is completely spiraling out of control.
The vintage addiction has him. He's furious that his father is being milked at the home, and he tries to break in to rescue him.
Which leads to a confrontation with Cleet.
A brutal one. Cleet, high on his own supply of vintage, beats Pax nearly to death. Deke finds him later, just horrifically injured. And seeing his friend like that, it finally solidifies for Deke how dangerous this whole system is.
So the tension is just at its absolute peak. But the real truth, the truth about Jolynn's death, is still buried.
And it comes from the last people you'd expect. From the people Pax had started to feel a real connection to.
Jolynn's daughters, Rainey and Sandra.
They bring Pax their mother's locked laptop, and then the confession begins.
What do they tell him?
Rainey reveals that the night she died, Jolynn called Reverend Hook.
And she asked for
Mifepri. RU-486, the abortion pill.
My God.
Hook confirms it. She met Joe on that mountain path by the oak tree and gave her the pills. Joe was pregnant again with a beta fetus, and she was going to terminate it.
She was making a choice. The ultimate act of defiance against the beta monomania.
But she wasn't suicidal.
So who killed her? It wasn't Tommy.
No. This is the staggering, tragic reveal. Rainey and Sandra, the two natural-borns, the girls the White Scarf militants idolize, they followed Hook and Joe that night.
The daughters
Now,
saw the pills being exchanged. They understood that their mother was about to terminate a beta fetus.
how could they? How did they justify that? Rainey looks Pax dead in the eye and says she did what she had to do.
It was a murder.
A cold-blooded murder, driven entirely by that biological imperative, that purity culture. They killed their own mother to protect their species and stop her from being the deviant who would taint their race.
It's the ultimate collision. Her belief in free will versus their hardwired instinct.
And it explains everything. Why there was no note, why the laptop was so important, and why her friends knew. They just knew she would never have abandoned her children.
They didn't see her as their mother in that moment.
They saw her as a threat to their continuation.
In the wake of this horrible revelation, Pax finally acts.
He does. He uses Deke's Argo workers and their strength to build a ramp. He gets Dr. Freilich to sign their release papers, and he forcibly removes his father from the home. He cripples Rhonda's vintage operation, at least for now.
And he finally gets his own TDS test. He's desperate to be anything other than the guy who ran.
He's hoping he's a new clade, an evolution, anything but a skip. But the results come back.
My condolences, Paxton. You're human.
He's just human in a world that has quantum leaped past him. And at the same time, the twins, who are now pregnant themselves,
Through parthenogenesis.
they disappear into the woods. They're taking the secret beta exodus route. They tell Pax they had to make him understand before they left.
Pax leaves Switchcreek, finally escaping the quarantine. But he's carrying this crushing secret.
He realizes he actually fell in love with Joe's daughters, and his failure to tell the truth about what they did is his final act of human complicity. His final thought is just devastating. If all of this, the addiction, the violence, the secrets, is what it means to be human.
No wonder the world is so fucked up.
And he realizes he has to escape his own nature, too.
So our deep dive into Switchcreek, it really shows us a community that is defined by its biological destiny. And yet it's still governed by the most basic human instincts: corruption, addiction, tribalism.
Right. Evolution gave them these radical new forms, but human nature, it stayed tragically the same.
And at the center of it is that profound, murderous clash between biological imperative and individual choice.
Absolutely. Jolynn was fighting for free will, for the right to choose, and that put her in direct opposition to the fundamental drive of her species, which is just hardwired to reproduce. Her death was the terrifying logical outcome of that fight.
And it's clear that TDS didn't just change their bodies. It fundamentally rewired their minds.
You see it in all of them. The Argos' constant need for restraint against their own strength. The Beta's reproductive monomania. Even Pax's experience with the Vintage, that forced empathy that just dissolved the boundaries of the self.
Which brings us to, I think, a really interesting final thought. Switchcreek was forced to confront the biological truths of its own nature, and it led to this cascade of crime and tragedy.
Which raises the question for us, doesn't it? If knowing the deep truth of your own nature, the quantum, the chemical, the evolutionary drivers in your brain, if that knowledge can completely rewrite your moral compass, what knowledge are we choosing to ignore about our own biology right now?
That's a heavy question.
It is. We face these truths every day, you know? What really drives our decisions, our loyalties, our conflicts? Do we have the courage to actually look at those biological and chemical realities? Or will we just stay skips, pretending our choices exist in a vacuum, completely separate from the scientific fact of who we are?
A truly provocative place to end. Thank you for diving deep into the genetics of disaster with us.
Yeah.
See you next time.